Welcome to Blooming Wildwood Homestead. Today I want to discuss the importance of thinking about 2 steps ahead of where you currently are in order to reach the goals that you have for yourself for this year. One of the things that we've really talked about is trying to think ahead as far as things that you are going to need for the garden and having those supplies on hand so that you are ready to go ahead and get started with gardening as soon as possible. And hopefully that is happening for you right now, or at least you've planned out what you're going to need so you're getting ready to jump into gardening and getting everything started. Now, as we're trying to get things going in the garden, it's important to start thinking a little bit further in advance. What are we going to do with the produce that we harvest? For some of you, you might have small container gardens, you might have a small garden, and your main purpose is going to be to provide fresh food for you throughout the course of the summer, and maybe you're going to have a few storage items that you're able to lay up for the fall and winter, such as onions, garlic, things of that nature. But for others of you, you've already had a small garden, maybe you've done it for a year or two, and now you're thinking ahead to expanding out that garden, making it a little larger so that you can restock your pantry or put some food away in the pantry, in the freezer, in your cupboard so that you have it for the upcoming year. And if that's the direction that you're headed and you're kind of new to the idea of food preservation and getting things set up, even though you're just now putting in your garden or thinking about putting in your garden, it's not too early to start thinking about that food preservation. So as we're thinking through that, what are your plans for preserving the extra food that you have? Are you thinking that you're going to want to dehydrate that food? If so, now would be a great time to start investigating and investing in a dehydrator if you don't already have one. Are you planning to freeze some of the extra berries? If so, you might want to look at purchasing some freezer bags so that you have those on hand and you're ready to go when the berries come on. We know from just the past couple of years, supply chain issues, shortages, now we're dealing with inflation, all of those things compound to make it more difficult to get the things that you need right when you need them. And so if we're not thinking a couple of steps ahead, we may not have the opportunity to get what we need to meet that food preservation goal. If you are thinking about canning, there are quite a few things that you need to keep in mind when you're looking at canning. The first would be making sure that you have jars. And if you already have jars, do you have enough to do what it is that you want to do for the upcoming year? Or do you need to look at investing in a few more, or maybe some different sizes? If you've always used quarts, maybe you found, like through the course of the pantry challenge, that boy, if I would have had this in a pint jar, it would have been a little easier for me to use that up at one time rather than having excessive amount of leftovers. Or maybe if I would have had this item in a quart jar, it would have been a lot better. So I would have had what I needed. I didn't need to use 2 pints. Whatever the case might be, hopefully you've kind of started to get a feel for what you're going to need. If you are brand new to canning, you definitely want to invest in some jars, and it's helpful to kind of think about the size of your family, what it is that you're going to be canning, and kind of go from there. If you have a small family, or if it's just a single person or a couple, you might not need to can jelly in a pint jar because you're probably just going to use like more of a half pint jar, a little bit at a time. And so you just want to have that in the back of your head. The second thing you want to think about when it comes to just purchasing jars is how readily available are the lids going to be in the future. Now, this is kind of hard because we know the last couple of years we really have had a lot of difficulty trying to find canning lids. And this is something that I've already been experiencing this year. I wanted to get a few wide mouth lids. I don't have a ton of wide mouth jars, and I tried not to use many of the wide mouths last year because I knew it was so difficult to be able to find the wide mouth lids. Additionally, they are more expensive than the regular mouth. However, when it comes to canning pickles or things that are a little bit broader across, the wide mouth really is a nice option because it allows you to be able to get in there and be able to work with the food that you're trying to pack into a smaller space. So I'd looked at trying to order some wide mouth some wide mouth lids rather. I haven't actually seen any wide mouth jars in stock anywhere, so that could potentially be another problem if you want to have some wide mouths on hand. But I ordered some, and they have a limit on how many you can purchase, so that's the first thing. And the second thing is I was able to get in one small limit of the wide mouth lids, and then I had placed a couple of subsequent orders, both of which were canceled because they said they didn't have the product to fulfill it. So, you know, I've had a little bit of conversation with some of you about different kinds of lids, and it's possible that if I'm going to have the lids that I need this year, I might have to go outside of the brands that I am typically accustomed to using. But regardless of where I decide to go with that, for you, it's important to start looking ahead because I'm already, you know, kind of thinking that direction and am challenged to find some things. We had a store locally that used to really sell a lot of canning supplies, and it's now been taken over by a different company, and they're not stocking as much of the canning supplies as they used to. And so I'm concerned that come canning season, we're just not going to see the variety or the quantity that they have had in the past due to different ownership, which really limits the availability of what we have locally here. And that means that I need to order things or look for other kinds of resources. Now, depending on what area you live in, you might have some local stores that you could purchase from that would be great resources for finding those canning supplies. And they might also be able to have a conversation with you about the potential availability or some potential options. So definitely check that out and see if you have something local to kind of help you get started with what kind of jars you might need, what kind of lids you might want to have on hand. Another big mistake that sometimes happens when you're a brand new canner, if you have bought a brand new packet or a brand new case rather of jars, you're going to use the lids that come on the jars, and we don't necessarily think about having extras on hand. But you do want to have some extra even if you're dealing with all brand new jars, because you're always going to run the risk that some of those jars are not going to seal the first time, and therefore you're going to have to reseal them, and you need extra lids on hand in order to be able to do that. A couple of years ago, I had bought a case of brand new jars, and I used the lids that came on them, and I would say nearly half of them did not seal. And this was for something that I had experienced canning. I had done it multiple times in the past. So I know that the issue came from the lids that were on the jars. So sometimes I think the lids that they're putting on the brand new jars are not necessarily always up to par with the lids that, I don't know. It just seems like maybe there might be a little bit of difference between the lids on the jars and the lids that you're purchasing in the box separately. All that to say, think about availability as far as whether or not you want to go with narrow mouth, wide mouth, pints, quarts, whatever the case may be. And you're probably going to want some type of variety. In addition to having your jars and lids, of course, you want to have your canners, and you've got some different options when it comes to looking at different kinds of canners. When it comes to hot water bath, You have more of the porcelain style, which works fine for gas burners, or you can use those on electric coil. That works just fine. But you do want to be careful about canning on glass top. From my understanding, if you have a glass top stove, it's best not to use any heavy stock pots or heavy canning equipment or canners on your glass top. So when I lived at my urban location, I had a glass top and I did a few different workarounds. I went ahead and got an electric water bath canner, and that just sits on the countertop. You're able to plug that in, and it worked really well for me. Freed up the stove. I didn't have to worry about anything breaking or anything being on the stove that didn't need to be there. And then it also holds an extra couple of jars, so that was an added benefit as well. The other thing is, if you decide to go with pressure canning, you do want to be careful again about where you're going to be doing that pressure canning. So with the glass top and even with the electric coil, it is kind of tricky because you're getting that heat, it's going on and off, so it can be much harder to regulate the temperature when you need to keep your pressure at a specific amount. I have done pressure canning on an electric coil before, and it works, but you have to watch it very, very closely. And then again, just because of the weight of the canner, I never used it on my glass top. So options when I had the glass top, I went ahead and got one of those outdoor stoves so that I could hook it up outside and have an outdoor burner to be able to use. It's not the most, well, it wasn't the most convenient for me because I didn't have like a covered place where I could do it. And so I could only do my pressure canning if it was going to be nice outside, so that I could just go out there and do it. But you know, it just depends on where you're at and what your necessity is. You could definitely work around that and just make sure that the weather is conducive when you decide to go ahead and pressure can. So, you know, all of those things can be kind of expensive. And again, if you're thinking 2 steps ahead, you might want to look at garage sales or estate sales. But I am finding that more people are getting interested in preserving their own food. And so I'm not sure how available some of those supplies are going to be at these type of sales anymore. And it might be one of those things where you would be lucky to find one, but I don't know. Take that however you want, but definitely start looking into that if that's something you're going to do. And if you do purchase a pressure canner from a garage sale or from somewhere else, or if you've had a pressure canner for a while and you haven't had the pressure gauge checked, now might be a good time to start looking into where you can go and get that done. Again, that store that used to be such a big canning supply store here, they used to offer some different times when people could come in and bring their pressure canner gauge so that they could get that checked. I don't know that they're going to do that anymore, but a lot of times you can check with your county extension office and they should be able to connect you with some place where they can check that pressure gauge, just to make sure that everything is holding the way that it should be so that your food is safe as you're preserving it. We just want to make sure that if you're going to go to all of the work to raise your food and then preserve your food, you want to make sure that it's going to be done properly so that, you know, it's worth all of the time investment that you've put into it. So it's always a good thing to do that properly. And then of course, you know, there's other gadgets and accessories that can kind of go along with some of those canning items as well. I will put some links to some of the items either that I have or some items that are similar to things that I have in the description down below, just so that you kind of have an idea of some of the things that you might want to be looking for as you're going out and about. Obviously, if you look kind of at a local store, you might, I mean, it just depends, be able to find better deals. If it's something that they kind of specialize in, you might be able to get more of a variety. But I just really want to encourage you today to be thinking a couple of steps ahead. I guess not being able to get those canning lids that I've been looking for just once again reminded me that even though some items might be doing a little bit better with our current supply chain, we're still seeing disruptions and we're still seeing gaps in what it is that we need. And so if we're not thinking a couple of steps ahead, it's going to be hard to do that food preservation once the garden's ready to harvest. And we don't want to be in a position where we're not able to put up all of the food that you've worked so hard to grow. So I hope this helps you today. If it was helpful, please remember to click the like button, and we would love to have you subscribe and be part of our community here. Until next time, bye everyone.